So I just need to let you know that you are all being recorded. Obviously, you'll only be recorded if you come off of mute to ask the question. So it shouldn't affect you in any way, but I just want you to be aware that we are recording today's session. So welcome to the Agriculture Spotlight. We're talking today about funding the future. We are really excited to be bringing you a series of agriculture events across this year, this being the first one. And it is being hosted by myself. My name is Debbie Lewis. I am the Business Growth Enabler for the Cambridge, Hertfordshire, Bedfordshire and Buckinghamshire region. And my colleague with me today is Caroline Hale, Agricultural Relationship Manager. Hello. Northampton and Leicester, and our colleague Nick has also been a huge part of organising today's event. Although he is not with us today, we just wanted to make sure that he got the recognition that he deserved. So Nick Gowling, another agriculture relationship manager for Bedford and Milton Keynes area. So don't worry, if you are based elsewhere in the country, we have opened this up much more broadly, and all of the content that we're sharing with you today is relevant for the whole of England and Wales. We'll be sharing that information with you today. So who else have we got on the agenda? Well, you are not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from our fantastic keynote speakers. We've got the wonderful Charlotte Gore from Fisher German, who's going to be talking to us all around the proposed DEFRA changes, funding, what else can you tap into just to make sure everything's on your radar. And then we've also got from RABI, we've got the lovely Lucy Bellafontaine. So thank you, ladies, for joining us, and we will introduce you in just a moment. Now, before I hand over to my colleague Ian, I want just to run through a little bit of housekeeping. So we are a reasonably large audience today, so I will ask you all to stay on mute unless you have a burning question that's really urgent and you need us to clarify something. Please use the chat functionality to be able to put your message, and then I'll be checking that, and I can either get our speakers to respond or I can type you a quick response in the chat. So use the chat function where possible. We are going to have a Q&A section at the end, so save any of your general questions to the end, and we'll either invite you to come off of mute or we'll ask you to pop it in the chat and we'll deal with those at the end. If you do, for any reasons, have any problems and you need to drop off, just come back in, just re-register. We're watching the waiting room and we'll get you back in, no problems. But please do stay on mute unless you have an urgent question. Right, so without any further ado, Mr. Burrow, I will hand over to you to say your introduction.
Okay, Debbie, thank you very much. Not often I'm called Mr. Burrow, but I'll take that acknowledgement and that kudos there. Thank you very much. Yeah, my name's Ian Burrow, as the slide suggests. I head up the agricultural channel across the NatWest, Royal and Ulster Bank brands. And my role primarily is to ensure that the 125 dedicated managers we've got in the sector have got all the tools in their toolkit to enable them to help support and enable growth in this exciting and wonderful sector that we are working. It's a great role because I do manage in normal times to get out and about, see a lot of farmers, a lot of industry bodies, membership bodies, and I've probably got what I feel is the best job in the bank. I did leave the bank about 6-7 years ago on a kind of a sabbatical to head up a renewable energy company, and the experience and knowledge that I got back from the outside external world in the renewables has stood us in very good stead when we talk about climate and sustainability that we'll touch on probably at the end of the Q&As. I won't steal any of Charlotte and Lucy's thunder, but we've got a hell of a lot of activity happening behind the scenes in the sector. As you can imagine, the climate change and all the opportunities that brings has taken a great deal of my time, doing a lot of education and awareness of the frontline specialist managers, as well as trying to ensure that we help our customers transition to that low carbon, resilient economy that we all desire. So climate change opportunities, I'm sure, will come up as a question at the end of the event. Obviously, the topical one that Charlotte's going to cover in more detail is the BPS transition. And again, as a bank, we're trying to do lots of planning and education to ensure that when customers do come up against that kind of question and that kind of issue regarding the reduction in subsidy payments, then we can be there to help and support. So I just want you to be rest assured that we're alive to all the various nuances in our sector. I've got a great team behind me, Roddy and Stacey, that are working tirelessly to ensure that we deliver everything that's needed and everything that's fit for purpose. As well as climate and the BPS, we've got the emergence of agri-tech. And again, one of the slides at the end of the session will touch upon the next session and the next topic that nicely dovetails into the robotics and the emergence of agri-tech in our sector. We've also got to keep an eye on the flooding that happened probably about 12, 18 months ago, and that will have a knock-on effect to the actual income and cash flow that our farmers are seeing today. And finally, when you talk about what we're trying to achieve as a bank and the purpose-driven focus that we've got, you know, the purpose-driven focus statement could have been really written for our sector. When you talk about helping champion potential businesses, farmers, thrive, etc., you know, it could have been written for us, really, to be honest. So I'm delighted to be here today. 135 registered and on the line is a great turnout. And I'm sure, you know, the content over the next hour and a bit will be excellent. And I'm there for questions at the end. So Debbie, without further ado, I just want to hand you back to you, then you to Charlotte, if that's all right.
Lovely. Thanks, Ian. And what I'd like to do before we get started is to get a bit of a sense check of where you all are in terms of your confidence around the subject that we're discussing today. So I'm going to launch a poll. This will pop up on your screen, and you should be able to select a number between 1 and 5 to represent how confident you are feeling around the contents of what we're discussing today. Of 1 to 5, where 1 is really low confidence. I'm not aware of RABI, or I don't know about the DEFRA changes, or you don't know about what else is on offer. That would be 1. If you're at the upper end, maybe you're thinking, why did Debbie not invite me to present this session? I am an expert on these areas. Then I'd like you to select number 5. And please don't worry, if you don't have the functionality and you can't answer this question, you're not going to be penalised. So we have got about 36 of you, 40 of you now responded. We're about halfway there. So if you can pop your response in the poll, we just want to get a sense of where you're sitting at the beginning of today, to know what level and what blend we've got. And I'm going to show you the results once they slow down. So we've got lots of people still responding. About 75% of you have responded so far. So 1 is really low confidence, 5 is complete confidence, 3 sits somewhere in the middle. Right, we're starting to slow down now. 10 more seconds to get your entry in. How confident are you feeling about the information and your grasp of it? Okay, I'm going to end the poll there, and I'm going to share the results with you. So you can see that we have the majority of people are sitting at a level 3. We're about mid-centre. We know a little bit about it, but we could know more. So I am going to just very quickly capture that information for later on. Thank you for taking part there. And I am now going to hand over to Charlotte, who's going to talk us through her keynote speech for today. Thanks, Charlotte, for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. And firstly, thank you very much to the NatWest team for inviting Fisher Dermer to speak this afternoon. So I'm going to share some of our thoughts on DEFRA's Agricultural Transition Plan, referred to as the Pathway to Sustainable Farming. I'm conscious I've only got 20 to 30 minutes this afternoon, so I will try to sort of give an overview of the provisions and then touch on what we think farmers should be doing to prepare themselves for the upcoming changes. And I must admit, I'm relieved that I haven't got a full audience of people that think they're at level 5 in terms of their existing knowledge. Okay, so next slide, please, and probably the next one as well. So if I start off with just a brief sort of summary as to where we are now. The Agriculture Bill was passed through Parliament in November 2020, thereafter becoming the Agriculture Act. Rather than containing any of the detailed policy, this just gave UK government the power to make the decisions about the replacement of support previously provided through the Common Agricultural Policy. We then had further details released by DEFRA later in the month, which again, although helpful as the basic framework for future support and providing an overview of what we can expect in the future, it's largely been criticised as an announcement about a series of announcements. Alongside this, and no less important, is the Environment Bill. It's currently delayed on its transition through Parliament, and linked to that is the 25-year Environment Plan, which sets out a series of targets aiming to protect and enhance the natural environment. Both of these will also have a significant impact on the future of agricultural strategy. Alongside the policy, there are a number of other key factors which will impact the farming industry and also likely to shape its future. Top of the agenda at the moment really are the Brexit trade deals. And whilst the deal struck on Christmas Eve largely maintains sort of current relationships with the EU, future trade deals with other countries are likely to present both opportunities and threats to UK agriculture. We've got a bit of an issue in our country with low productivity growth as compared to our competitors. So that's certainly something for us to consider as a potential solution to the reduction in subsidies, and indeed a reason why the government is so keen to address these subsidies. And lastly, there is the potential for changes to capital taxation of farmland. It's looking increasingly likely, if not in the upcoming budget review, then in the near future. And these changes will undoubtedly have an impact on land values and subsequently the structure of the UK farming sector. Next slide, please. So probably most notably and most important for many farmers, the transition plan confirms the phasing out of direct payments, or basic payment scheme as we refer to it. These phased percentage deductions will start from this year, 2021, and continue until the last year of payment in 2027, with no basic payment scheme received from 2028 onwards. You'll see on the slide now, I've put up what the government has announced so far, which is the percentage reductions until 2024. These deductions are based on the 2020 claim size. So the larger your claim, the higher the deductions in a sort of like an income tax banding arrangement. So claimants who last year received up to £30,000 basic payment scheme will this year receive a 5% lower payment. Claimants who last year received £50,000 will receive a 5% deduction on the first £30,000 and then a 10% reduction on the next £20,000 of their payment, and so on. So you'll see that the idea, or a sort of rough estimate for everybody, is that by 2024, payments will be an absolute maximum of 50% of what you received last year. So if we just show what that looks like for a 100 hectare farm as compared to a 500 hectare farm, on the next slide. As I say, we only have the announcements of the reductions up to 2024. So for the purposes of this, we've just extrapolated a straight line deduction up to the zero payments in 2028. So you'll note that the smaller claims can actually expect a slightly lower impact of the deductions in the first couple of years, so over the next couple of years, with our 100 hectare farm here receiving just £1,000 less in 2021 than in 2022. But you will see that by 2024, that impact is that the basic payment scheme has halved. The larger claims have a much greater impact from the outset, and you'll actually see that in 2024 they're receiving just 40% of their 2020 payment. So wherever your farm sits on this spectrum, what's really important is that you assess the impact of the deductions in BPS on your bottom line, and then factor that into any forward budgeting and understand what you might be able to do to improve or maintain your profits. And there are a number of calculators available on the website which will help you to do this, or if you contact me afterwards, I'll be able to send you one. Next slide, please. So we've seen how basic payment scheme is going to decrease over the next 7 years, but the DEFRA proposal has actually introduced a couple of new concepts, the first being delinking. Currently, a basic payment scheme claimant must be actively farming the land on the 15th of May each year and hold the equivalent number of entitlements in order to receive the subsidies. This proposal is that, that this system will be delinked. So essentially, the link will be broken between occupying land and the rights to claim subsidies. From the point of delinking, the right to claim will then be based on a historic reference year, during which year the farmer will need to have claimed basic payment scheme. And then any changes to land occupation from that point onwards will actually not affect their right to claim that area. So in theory, a farmer could double their farmed area or indeed quit farming, and they will still have the right to claim the same area of direct payments for the remainder of the transition period. Now, at the moment, we're expecting that reference year to be 2024. There was some initial speculation that it might be sooner, as soon as 2021, but the latest papers have confirmed that it's more likely to be 2024. So it's just something to bear in mind around that time if there are any proposed future changes to tenancies, business structures, or even land sales and purchases. And then related to that is the proposal for farmers to roll up or capitalise their future payment rights into one lump sum exit payment. This is expected to be possible from next year, from 2022. Although it's highly likely at this stage that it will only be for farmers choosing to retire from farming. Now, we're expecting a lot more detail of this in the next couple of months, but as you'll appreciate, the aim is to facilitate farmers to retire to free up the land for new entrants and young farmers. Now, there will no doubt be a discount for taking this lump sum rather than continuing to receive annual payments. And whether the option is in the future opened up to other farmers is most likely to depend on its initial uptake and availability of budget in future years. Next slide, please. So I thought I would just quickly touch on basic payment scheme this year for anyone concerned about any changes, given that the application window is fast approaching. Although this is the first year when we'll receive the reduced payments, the process of application will actually remain largely unchanged. The deadline is moving 2 days to the 17th of May, just because of the way the days of the week fall this year. But applications will be made online, or for those people still doing it by paper, as usual. The window for application opens in 3 weeks' time on the 18th of March. I think it's very unlikely we'll see any COVID extensions, so 17th of May is highly likely to be the deadline again this year. There is, on a much more positive note, hopefully everyone is aware that there is no crop diversification nor ecological focus areas to consider, which is a big relief and hopefully prevents some of the more complicated issues with double funding and countryside stewardship. Entitlement and land transfers can be made online, and the window for that is open already. And we are expecting payment in December as usual. The 2-year entitlement usage rule that previously meant that entitlements were confiscated if they weren't claimed every other year has now been scrapped. So in conjunction with postponing the reference year that I mentioned in the previous slide, this is actually likely to push up the value of entitlements. So just something to bear in mind if you've taken on extra land or become a new tenant, and you might need to look at purchasing any new entitlements this year. Next slide, please. There has been a commitment by the government to maintain overall the current level of agricultural support, which is currently around 2.4 billion for the duration of the current government. So until 2024, But as we've seen, there will be money saved from the basic payment scheme, and this saved money will be redirected towards environmental stewardship. Whilst the commitment for funding will no doubt be a positive for most of the industry, farmers do need to appreciate that basic payment scheme is almost entirely profit. And although income levels will be supplemented by going into a stewardship scheme, these schemes do entail greater management input, and therefore the actual profit achieved is usually less. So the graph that you can see on the screen now is DEFRA's expectation as to how funding will be redirected from the basic payment scheme, which you'll see is currently just under 70% of the total pot of money, towards environmental payments. It's worth noting at this stage probably that actually just under 30% of all basic payment scheme claimants are currently in some sort of stewardship scheme, with DEFRA's ambition to increase that to 70% by the end of the transition period. Next, please. So if we now take a look at this stewardship, ELMS, or Environmental Land Management Scheme, has actually been bandied around for several years now, and it seems that we still don't really know much detail. At least the N, which stood for new, seems to have been dropped from the start of the title, perhaps acknowledging that it might be less radical than had initially been discussed. The underlying concept is to reward farmers and land managers for public goods that they provide that aren't otherwise rewarded by the marketplace, so public money for public goods. Objectives being to deliver high air and water quality, to protect and enhance biodiversity, to prevent, reduce and adapt to climate change and other environmental hazards, to provide public access and contribute to the public's enjoyment and understanding of nature, and to protect rural, historic, environmental landscape features. There will be 3 tiers to ELMS. The lowest tier is the Sustainable Farming Incentive. This is going to be a very broad and shallow scheme that will probably look similar to the historic entry-level stewardship and the current mid-tier countryside stewardship schemes. And I'll give a little bit more detail on this in a minute. The middle tier, called the Local Nature Recovery Scheme, will reward farmers for positive land management and will be tailored to local priorities, probably similar to countryside stewardship higher tier. It will have a focus on biodiversity, on flood management, perhaps on carbon capture and landscape heritage. And it's quite likely that a full land management plan will be required as a prerequisite for this. And then the top tier is landscape recovery. This will require a commitment for long-term land use change and is probably going to be reserved, well, it will be reserved for priority sites and projects such as restoration of peat bogs, large-scale tree planting, and it's going to be a very bespoke scheme, so therefore probably not relevant to the majority of farmers. We're expecting there to be both multi-annual revenue options as well as capital items under all of these tiers, so similar to the current countryside stewardship. And it's not yet clear whether there will be fixed 5-year terms or perhaps the option for shorter schemes, maybe even annual applications for some of the simpler options. There are pilots going on later this year, which will hopefully reveal more about the options and, most importantly, the payments. But I think these are likely to be a more simple payment per practice or pound per hectare, rather than the payment by results or reversal auctions that had previously been discussed. Maybe these will come further down the line. I will add, though, that while it will be important to be giving value for the taxpayers' money, there should no longer be the restriction of the income foregone principles of the EU schemes. So an element of profit is likely to be built into any payment rates, which should make the scheme more attractive and encourage a greater uptake. Slide, please. So I'll mention again the Sustainable Farming Incentive, as this is most likely to be the most relevant scheme, certainly in the early stages, and aims to be suitable for all farming types. Initially, we're expecting this to fund some of the management practices that have been missed out of the current countryside stewardship scheme, such as soil management and integrated pest management. And the Environment Secretary, George Eustace, actually mentioned this specifically in his speech at the NFU conference yesterday. He gave the example of a basic hedgerow creation and management as being a potential option under some of the pilots that they're running. Payment rates are likely to be low for this, possibly more along the lines of the old entry-level stewardship, which was £30 a hectare. But land can be entered into a sustainable farming incentive scheme alongside an existing countryside stewardship. So the option for layering there, I think, will be quite attractive to farmers. Next, please. So alongside the environmental schemes, there are various other sources of grant funding that were introduced in the transition plan. And although the detail is a little sketchy, it's worth being aware of these if you are planning any investment for your farms. Firstly, the Farming Investment Fund will be similar to the Countryside Productivity Grant that we've all had in the last few years and will open up later this year. It will have two elements to it. The first being a basic farming equipment and technology grant. This is probably going to be a non-competitive scheme. It will fund equipment and technology on farms, very similar to the small grant scheme that we've just had 3 rounds of. The grants will most likely be around 40% of the cost of a list of specified and predetermined items, such as cattle handling equipment. And then the second level is the Farming Transformation Fund, which will be reserved for much larger, more substantial investment in equipment or projects or infrastructure on the farm. That will probably be a competitive scheme, have 2 application stages, and may be reserved for things more like reservoirs or robotic technology or investment into precision agriculture equipment. We've got the Farm Resilience Scheme. This will fund advice to help farmers adapt to changes in the industry and is hopefully opening up later in the summer. Then the Farming in Protective Landscapes Scheme will open up from later this year, and that's designed to help support farmers in national parks and areas of outstanding national beauty, particularly targeting upland farmers to further protect the environmental, social and cultural benefits those areas. The Slurry investment scheme will open from 2022 and aims to provide grant funding for slurry storage and associated equipment, but generally only where it's over and above any current legal requirement. And the Animal Health and Welfare Grant will support livestock farmers to produce healthier livestock in higher welfare conditions, with a particular focus on eradication of endemic diseases. And this could be through access to capital grants or herd health plans. We know very little about the new entrant support scheme, but the funding aims to provide long-term opportunities for new entrants, and it's probably unlikely to be in the form of additional payments like the current EPS. You will note from that list that there is no mention of any sort of rural diversification or food processing or rural tourism grant, similar to the sort of RDP or leader style grants that we've been used to in the past. These probably won't be DEFRA funded, but will fall into the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which will be part of the Ministry or led by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. This fund is designed to target businesses most at need. So alongside rural communities, it will also encompass perhaps some coastal areas, ex-industrial areas, and deprived towns. And we've got no idea at the moment how much of that pot will be targeting rural businesses. Next slide, please. So with all of the above in mind, what should you be considering now? Whilst it might be tempting to hope for business as usual, the image on the right shows how not to approach the next few years. Income from subsidies last year made up about 60% of farm business income, which is a measure of net profit. So it's clear that the reduction in subsidies will have a significant impact on many farming businesses. But within this hides a huge variation. Livestock farms are generally more reliant on subsidies, and some intensive specialist pig, poultry and horticulture, for fairly obvious reasons, are less so. And indeed, within the different enterprises, farm business income or profit varies substantially, with average profits from a large mixed farm around £325 a hectare, but that's nearly doubles to £611 per hectare in the top performing quarter of this farm type. So an assessment of farm business efficiency is essential as an initial stage to try and perform or improve performance of a farm and aim towards that top 25%. Initially, take this to gross margin level, assessing physical performance and benchmarking against industry standard. But then also remember that a positive gross margin doesn't always translate into a net profit once overhead costs have been included. It might be helpful to translate the loss of BPS over the next 7 years into a production unit of your own farm output. For example, at £90 an acre, basic payment scheme equates to about half a tonne of wheat at current prices. And then a thorough evaluation of all the assets available on a farm, including skills, buildings, land and environmental assets, will reveal any underutilisation or perhaps some opportunities for change, maybe a diversification project. It's likely that for some businesses, the upcoming changes will trigger a more radical business decision. And sadly, there will be some farm businesses that are unable to weather the next 7 years. But stepping back from day-to-day farming doesn't have to mean ending a business. And collaborating with neighbours or with young farmers through share farming agreements, through contract farming agreements, or machinery pooling should also be considered. It might also be an opportunity to greater involve the next generation. And finally, of course, with the future emphasis on environmental land management, having a countryside stewardship scheme on your farm will enhance the farmed environment, provide some financial stability, and help to get into this future mindset. Next, please. So I just want to finish by spending a few minutes updating you on the countryside stewardship scheme, because this is a scheme that's available now until 2024. And it's something that we are strongly recommending that all farmers consider. Countryside stewardship is generally a 5-year term, and it can encompass annual revenue land management options, as well as capital items. Majority of these applications will be mid-tier, but farms in certain priority habitat areas may qualify for the higher tier. The income is guaranteed each year, and payments are received annually in December. Providing the options are in place and you meet the management prescriptions, the payments are fixed, and therefore, unlike most agricultural trading, they're not affected by weather conditions or by fluctuations in commodity markets. So a valuable and reliable input into a farming model. There is the option to include capital works, and I'll give a few examples of this later, but it can include fencing, concreting and trackways. There are obviously benefits to increasing biodiversity on your farm, for example, encouraging pollinators, increasing organic matter, and not to mention the personal enjoyment of seeing an increase in wildlife on the farm. In many cases, a stewardship scheme works well with game shoots. Planning a scheme is also an excellent opportunity to really assess which land is most and least productive on the farm. This might be through access to yield mapping technology, or simply by assessing historic overhead imagery or using knowledge of farming the land over several years. By removing lower yielding land from production, you're reducing input use and raising average yields across the farm. This might be in awkward field corners or unproductive field margins, but increasingly stewardship options are being used at field scale level as a valuable part of an arable rotation. They're also great for incorporating livestock grazing into an arable environment. And of course, with the industry's commitment to net zero by 2040, many of the stewardship options will help to increase soil organic matter and therefore increasing carbon sequestration and working towards an individual farm's carbon neutral status. So our advice would be to try and think a few years ahead and be bold with a choice of options in a scheme. Ideally, seek advice from a consultant or from a Natural England advisor at an early stage, as the RPA manual does unfortunately stretch to several hundreds of pages. And whilst there is greater flexibility in the scheme, there are certain pitfalls to avoid. The record keeping requirements can be onerous, and the establishment and ongoing maintenance of the various options must be given greater priority than under previous schemes. Generally, we advise clients or farmers to treat the stewardship options like a crop in their own right. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that some of these options fit well into an arable rotation, and I think this is quite an interesting graph. It shows the net margins of a few of the most popular arable and potentially field scale and rotational arable stewardship options as compared to a fairly average farm rotation. Some of these options we're finding can be a great break crop replacement, perhaps to replace oilseed rape in this region. They can have, as I mentioned, good blackgrass control, and they also can increase the organic matter. And some of them, such as the AB15, can add nitrogen fixing into the rotation. So while the income from these schemes doesn't necessarily exceed cash crops such as winter wheat in a good year, I think it's interesting to compare it to the break crops such as autumn rape, spring barley, winter beans, perhaps spring oats. And you'll note that many of the options actually exceed very average crops such as these. It's also worth bearing in mind that stewardship options are payments for 5 years. It's unlikely you'll have 5 years of top performing wheat. And also that stewardship options tend to be on smaller fields with perhaps lower yielding and some of the sort of awkward corners and field margins. Now, of course, arable cropping margins vary from farm to farm. Each farming setup is unique. And for example, an owner-occupier with fixed labour and machinery resources might see fewer benefits from following some of the land. But hopefully this just provides a bit of food for thought. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that capital payments are also available within a mid-tier countryside stewardship scheme. And I think this is a really good incentive to go into a scheme. I've put a few examples up on the slide, but one to really draw attention to is sheep netting at £4.90 per metre. We've certainly seen some schemes with some very punchy capital works being included, and we've had very few rejections so far. So I think a really good chance to assess where this might benefit you as a farmer. Now, alongside the full scheme is the option to just take advantage of funding for some of these capital items. That could be through a standalone hedgerow and boundary grant, or indeed through a water priority, or what was the old catchment sensitive farming grant. The maximum value for each of these standalone grants has actually increased this year to £20,000 for each. And this would be a 2-year scheme with a much wider selection of options than in previous years. In particular, the one that seems to attract quite a lot of interest is the concrete yard renewal, which pays at about £27 per square metre. So it sort of covers around the cost of, covers about half of the concreting cost. So again, if you are farming within a targeted water priority area, a really good thing to look at if you're doing any yard development. I think I'm going to finish here because I'm conscious of time. But hopefully the last 20 minutes or so have given a bit of an insight into some of the policy changes that we can expect, and perhaps help you plan for what will undoubtedly be a period of significant change within the industry.
Charlotte, thank you so much. That was such an enormous download in such a short period of time. We're really super grateful. Thank you so much. And I'm sure our audience are going to have questions for you. But if we ask them just to hold off on questions while we hear from Lucy. Lucy, I'm going to hand over to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Debbie. Hello, everyone. Just again, thank you so much to NatWest for inviting me, RABI, along just to give everyone an update and hopefully provide them with a bit more information. Looking at the poll, it might be that some of you are sitting at a 2 or 3 about knowing about RABI. So hopefully we will all learn a bit more. You might not be aware, but this week is Farming Help Awareness Week. So it's very timely that I can spend time talking to you guys about what we get up to and how we can help. And obviously the title of the webinar today, Funding the Future. So I will touch on a few things that we're doing to help, to look into the future to help RABI help the farming community. So firstly, RABI has actually been running for 160 years. Last year we had big plans to celebrate 160 years, but unfortunately they all got cancelled. But yes, 160 years, and we've been helping the farming community through tough times, and sometimes it's just the small things that we help with make a huge impact to people's lives. We help current working farmers, we help retired farmers, and we help initially financially, but we are also there to help just guide people through a difficult situation, a difficult time. And it's just not one-off help. We might help you and then revisit you guys 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 2 years down the line and see if you need further help. So we're there always to help with you. Some of the things that we come up against that the people who are contacting us that would like help with, such things as debt, low prices. I think Ian touched on things to do with prices and the next coming, the weather from last year obviously affecting this year and things like that. Ill health, so that's physical and that's mental, and that could be yourself or it could be a loved one. There's loss of income, weather, we all know about the floods and snow, the storms that we're now getting quite regularly each year. Like I said before, we help a lot of people through retirement, and this could be just helping them live better in a lot of people don't save money, don't have savings, so we can help them in their retirement. State benefits, we actually help people fill out those horrible, horrible forms, and I'm sure you've all been through that with BPS and things. I've seen those forms. There's a lot of things to fill out, and not everyone likes to fill out those forms. Just to give you insight, last year, 2020, we gave out £2.3 million across England and Wales, and that helped 1,170 individuals' cases. And that money, 2.3, is increasing dramatically every year. So we are helping more people with more money as the years go on. And just to touch on last year with the pandemic, we obviously had specific things to do with the pandemic. So there's a lot of loss of income from diversifications. So for example, people might be doing B&B, camping, office units and things on their properties, on their farms, to supplement income. So a lot of those had those streams lost. Obviously, people were ill, people had to isolate, people did have COVID, so we helped in those situations. Things like that you might not think about the effects, but people that are ongoing medical treatment, those kind of things have stopped, so they couldn't get to their medical treatment. So a lot of things that we have been helping with. I'll just quickly run through an example just so you can kind of see how we've helped. Just going back to picking up on the winds, the storms, and I think it was a few years ago, Storm Doris came and battered a part of the UK, and a farmer went out to his cattle yard to try and secure some of the barn that had been caught by the wind and it had blown up. Got the ladder out, up the ladder, went to pull the sheeting down to make it safe, and unfortunately the wind caught the ladder fell down and he fell straight onto his legs. and he then ended up in hospital for a considerable amount of time, having multiple surgery on one of his legs to make it better. So that meant a lot of recuperation. That also meant that he couldn't work on the farm. So we actually helped him through that with what we call a domestic grant, and also help him finding some people to work on the farm and do the work. Also another one, just talking about the weather. This is going back a few years now. It was all the floods up in Cumbria, and a gentleman that was a local farmer, and I believe he was in his 40s. He was going along to the local action group that was brought together because of the floods and the situation. The water was getting closer to the community where he lived, and his farm and his farm animals, which were sheep, and he was due to be lambing. I think it was 500, 600 ewes. He went along to that meeting and unfortunately had a heart attack and died there at the meeting, leaving behind his business, his family, the sheep that were about to lamb. So we helped his wife to just kind of get through those really, really horrible days after that, and beyond over the months, and helped the family just kind of get through that really, really rough time. And then on the other end, you know, when it's talking about retired people, we can help just fund a new fridge because they couldn't afford a fridge and they were just getting by with a fridge that was leaking, or things like just a new pair of spectacles. These small things make massive differences to people's lives. So just going forward, sorry, next slide, I'm getting carried away. Thank you, Debbie. Just going forward, we are talking about the future, and with RABI, we are looking at different ways to help the farming community. And as I said, we've been going for 160 years. The problems that farmers are facing are very different now than it was 160 years. And we have launched this online wellbeing platform because we feel that mental health, mental wellbeing is so important in the farming community, as I'm sure you're all aware. The platform is called Coos and Quell, and it can be accessed from our RABI website. If you go on the front page, there's a blue button on the right hand side. You just click on that and away you go. And we'll be able to put those links in the emails after this session. So it's free, it's safe, it's anonymous. You can go in, sign up, and there's a whole range of articles to read about the industry and about how you might be feeling yourself about the industry. And the most important thing is access to online counsellors. These online counsellors are trained professionals, and they are all trained in certain types of issues and things, but they've all got knowledge of farming background, and they've all been trained in certain things that are likely to come up in discussion. And they are there to be accessed and to be used. The two sites, Coos and Quell, is one's 18 and under and 18 and over. So when you log in, you'll get signposted to whichever one fits you. And we're using it, suggesting it's kind of an interim. So some people might have already made that step to talk to their GP about having some counselling, and there might be 6 weeks, 8 weeks wait. This is a very good way to be able to connect with some counselling to get things moving. And Coos and Quell are a recommended source of help through the NHS as well. Move on, please. Next slide, please. And the other thing that we have launched at the beginning of this year is the Big Farming Survey. And the reason we've done this is we need to develop a library of first need to develop an evidence library of the many challenges faced by farmers and the impacts they have on their physical and mental well-being and at home with the farming business. So we've launched the Big Farming Survey, as I said, at the beginning of January, to build a true picture of how things are currently in the farming community. The findings will be published later on in the autumn, and this will help us identify the support that's needed to help the community out there and have the greatest impact. As you see there, we've got 5 key areas that we want to look at throughout the survey. And I'm hoping that many of you might have come across the survey already, because it has been out in the agricultural publications, Farmers Weekly, the NFU, British Farmer and Grower, and CLA magazines. It is, as you can see there, it's launched from the beginning of January to the very end of March. And if you come across it, please, 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 I urge you to fill it out and send it on. If you end up having multiple copies sent to your house, is there a farm worker? Is there someone else on the farm that can fill it out? We're asking people, teenagers, parents, grandparents, anyone connecting with the farm to fill it out. It's a snapshot in time of how you're feeling, how you're doing in the farm, so that we can gauge what the farming community are feeling, to see how that we can help in the future. And it's about trying to find the right things to help everyone to make sure that they've got their fit for the future and fit for carrying on. So just a quick whistle tour of our ABI there, and our two things that we're working on to build a better future for us all, to help us all. I'd just like to say as well that if you feel like you might need some help, or you know someone, your loved one, your neighbour, the farmer down the road, please do encourage them to ring up. I know it's quite a brave thing to ring up and ask for help, but we are here to help, and we will help however we can. It may not be that you need some financial help. It might just you need some support and some advice, guidance to go in the right direction. So please help us help the farming community. Thank you very much. And if you've got any questions later on, please just let me know. Thank you, Debbie.
Lucy, thank you so much. And we will be following up after today's session with an email which will contain the Big Farming Survey link, as well as some other linked information from today's session. So thank you, Lucy, so much for sharing that with us. So you might be asking yourself, what's next? We are going to do some Q&A in a moment, but I'm mindful that some people will need to dial off in 5 minutes. So we are going to come back to a Q&A, but I'd like to just bring your attention to our next Spotlight event, which is going to be taking place in 12 weeks. So Thursday, the 22nd of April. That's going to be at 3:30 again in the afternoon, and again via Zoom. It won't be this number, it will be another number. So you need to register via Eventbrite, and at that session we're going to be talking about financing the future. So today was funding the future. We're going to be talking about financing the future. And for anybody who hasn't already signed up for the absolutely free resource that is NatWest Business Builder, I've put that in the chat for you, and that will also be in the follow-up email. So I'd like to thank very much our two guest speakers today, Charlotte and Lucy. We do have a question for both of you. So before I hand over to Caroline to close the session, we'll cover off these questions. And if anybody else has any questions, please do pop them in the chat or use the raise hand function just to let us know that you've got a question. So the first question is for Lucy. Lucy, could you explain for us how the agricultural charities work and interrelate or support each other? So are you connecting and working together with the FCN? Who should you contact and when, and do you work together?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, there are a number of farming charities out there that all do slightly different things, that we are all have got the same goal of helping farmers and the farming community. You've got ourselves, our ABI, and then you've got our sister charity in Scotland. So the Scottish RABI, and then us, RABI, do England and Wales. FCN, the Farming Community Network. There's also other ones, Addington Fund and Forage Aid. So you might have heard of all those. And also, just to highlight, there is YANA, but they're only based in Suffolk and Norfolk. So the main difference between RABI and FCN, RABI financially help primarily, and then obviously we, as I said before, we help and guide, support along the way. FCN, I've always said it's kind of pastoral care. They're there on the end of the phone. They actually man the helpline. So there is a farming charities helpline number which FCN man, and they've got volunteers that talk to you on the phone, a bit like the Samaritans really. Addington is the one that helps with rural housing, and Forage Aid, self-explanatory really, is the one that helps with fodder, forage, food for your animals. And then Yana is help with counselling. So if you feel like you need help and you're not quite sure which one fits the bill, the best thing to do is to ring the helpline number. And as I said, the FCN team, they man the helpline and will be able to pass you on to the right person. We work very well together, and if one charity can't help but we know the other one can, we do pass the cases across the different charities to make sure that individual receives the help they need for their individual case, and they're not kind of just left going, oh, which way do I turn? So we do work really well together. The Farming Help Charities, there isn't a separate website for that, so you can click on that and see all the differences. So thank you. I hope that has explained it.
Lovely. And a question for you, Charlotte. At what level do you see FBT rents being in 4 years' time? Can you comment on that?
Gosh, there's a huge variation in rents depending on the type of farm and across the country. I don't think probably, well, to start with, yes, I think rents are going to have to come down, certainly off some of the peak levels that we might have seen, but ultimately rents are often driven by a demand in the marketplace, and all the time that demand is in place for whatever reason, there will still be some rents at a reasonable level. In 4 years' time, we are probably going to be beyond that sort of delinking stage. There'll be a lot more variation in rent, no doubt, at that stage, as to whether the tenant has already got the sort of the rolled up or the future payment rights on that land. I don't see that rent is going to come down directly in line with the decrease in basic payment scheme, because I'm sure that there will be other opportunities that increase, as I said, not straight away, but perhaps in 3-4 years' time, both in terms of public funding through ELMS, and also some more interesting things, perhaps in private funding through carbon credit sales, or indeed through some of the biodiversity offsetting that is being brought in through the Environment Act. So there will, as I say, that there will definitely come down, but I think the pain will probably be shared by landlords and by tenants, so probably not a direct relationship with the decrease in payments.
Lovely, thanks, Charlotte. And then another question that we've had, if somebody feels that they're already doing as much as is practically and profitably possible, how are they going to find other ways to maintain their income as suggested in the graph? Now, I know you gave a lot of suggestions, but is there anywhere else they can go to, perhaps to research other alternatives or to think tank with other people to be able to see what others are doing to bridge that gap?
I mean, there are, I mean, AHDB has a lot of sort of farmer groups, whether that's locally or nationally, and they do a lot of benchmarking. So it's a really good way to measure your business against other local businesses. I think, again, there's not going to be a one size fits all solution to this, and it might be more a sort of marginal gain in that you have to assess every aspect of your business and try and find improvements in all areas, rather than that there's going to be one miraculous solution, I'm afraid.
And Charlotte, I would add to that, obviously we work sector agnostically with our support in enterprise, and this situation, whilst it is unique to agriculture, it's not unique to business, and we do have to look at business diversification, business model change. I mentioned on there the NatWest Business Builder. There is a massive library of resources that get you to think differently about what am I not seeing, what are my other options. So although they're not sector specific, it is worth working through some of the modules if you've got some time. They're always about 30 minutes long, just to look at, what have I not considered? So thank you, that's great answer. I hope that answers the question for the person who posed it. What is or how is the bank planning to help with climate or sustainability transition regarding funding? Who shall I go to for this one? Will that be Caroline or Ian?
I'll answer that one, Debbie. I'll start off if that's okay. We recognise that we've got to do something different and quite unique to help and support all of our customers with their transition to a low carbon economy journey. The sector itself, as far as the bank's concerned, at the front and centre of the Paris alignment. So what we've done already is to map our CO2 emissions versus our lending in the sector, which is around about £6 billion. And we've got one side of the kind of equation, and the other side of the equation is to help and support all of our customers transition their own business, their own farm, from a position A to a position Z in order to reduce their own emissions. Because we can see, and when we talk to some of the large supermarkets who've got contracts in the supply chain, we can see that coming down the track very soon is a fact that we think that all farms and farmers will be asked by their contractor, their supply chain host, what is their plans and what are their kind of CO2 emissions picture. So we're developing with our central proposition and product team a unique and hopefully first out the traps, first to market, a green transition sustainability loan that will reward farmers with incentivised payments, incentivised reduced margins if the proposition and project that they're wanting to undertake is a kind of a recognised sustainability project. So, like a slurry storage cover or water management treatment, you name it. Obviously, we're going to assess those applications on a case-by-case basis. So we're not going to try and go down the risk curve, but certainly we're working towards, and we've got some high-level people involved, Debbie, to try and get off the grounds an SME agricultural kind of mortgage that helps and supports customers transition to a low-carbon economy.
Brilliant. So we had some hot off the press insider info here today. Thanks, Ian. That's fantastic. Before I hand to Caroline to close and to thank our speakers again for today, I do want to just ask you to complete one repeat poll, if I may. So this is going back to where we started on today's session. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you now feeling, having heard those presentations from Charlotte and from Lucy about the information regarding the proposed DEFRA changes and the information that is provided by Rabi? So we hope that you have seen some skill gain in our session today. I mentioned that I'm going to be following up after today's session with an email giving you those links. I'm also going to be sending you a very short survey asking you what you thought about the event today, how you felt about the information that was contained within it, the way that it was pitched to you, did it meet your expectations, but also what would you like us to cover off in the series moving forward. So we've talked about financing the future. We're going to be bringing in our colleagues from Lombard talking about robotics and how you can develop opportunities within your farm as technology improves and becomes more accessible. So thank you for completing that poll. I'm going to give it just 5 more seconds if anyone else wants to hit a button. 1 is I have no knowledge or low knowledge. 5 is I could take the class, this was amazing. And then somewhere between 3 and 4 is fair to middling. So I'm going to end that poll and share the results with you. Phew, always delighted when we've increased the average knowledge score of the group. So thank you for sharing that with us and for giving up your time today as well. So I'm just going to take a snap of that for perpetuity. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Caroline, to close today's session. Thanks, Caroline.
Thanks very much, Debbie. I hope you can hear me. Firstly, I just want to say a massive thank you to Charlotte, Lucy and Ian for their presentations today. I don't know about you, but it's all very confusing and I think they really put it in very plain English for us, which is what I like. Also a big thank you to Debbie for hosting. She's been my technical guru all the way through and without Debbie, we wouldn't have been able to have the event today. But my biggest thank you actually is to all of the people who joined. This event was a little bit of a brainchild. It was going to be a very select few. It grew arms and legs. And so thank you very much for actually giving up your time. I know how incredibly busy you are at the minute, whether you're getting ready to lamb or whether you're drilling or whatever you're doing. There's a lot going on at this precise minute. So just to let you know who I am, so my name's Caroline Hale. I am one of the 125 agricultural specialist managers that work for NatWest, and I cover Northampton and Leicester. I'm sure you've all seen the inserts. DEFRA keeps saying to us, farming is changing. We just wanted to let you know that here at NatWest, we are here to help you with that changes. Myself and my colleagues, we are really committed to support you and get you through as best we can and try and offer as much advice and support as we can. As we said, there's going to be other events running. I know it's already been mentioned quite a few times, the Lombard event on the 22nd of April, which will be focusing on the technology and robotics. It's a very strange and startling world we're going into. But as Debbie said, herself and I, we're working closely together. We're trying to make sure that we're covering the things that customers want us to cover. These events are for you and they are led by you. So if there is anything particular you would like to see, anything you're not too sure about, drop myself, drop Debbie a line, and we can look at getting that onto the agenda for the rest of the year. But on top of that, I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody for joining. I hope you found the session valuable. I know I did. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks, guys. We'll send out that survey and all the following links. Thanks to all our speakers. And you are all welcome to dial off and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.